Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The United States announced earlier last week its decision to end temporary waivers vis-à-vis oil purchases from Iran, which were granted to 8 countries that relied heavily on Iranian oil supply for the purpose of a transition period, would expire on the 2nd of May. The measure aims to decrease Iran's oil exports to zero in line with the Trump administration's declared goal of depriving the Ayatollah regime of the funds it has used to destabilize the Middle East. To analyze the developments and possible consequences of these measures, we're joined here in the studio by Mr. Meir Javedanfar, who is an Iran lecturer at IDC Herzliya. Welcome. I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Ambassador Dani Ayalon, who is Israel's former Deputy Foreign Minister and Ambassador to the United States. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Mr. Oren, give us a broader update on the latest developments pertaining to Iran.
What we see is a series of measures which the United States has taken over the last several weeks, starting with the designation of the Revolutionary Guards as a terror organizations, and the Iranians have come back and designated the Central Command of the United States as what they call a terror organization. Then what we saw is the offer of $10 million for whoever brings information which will enable the disruption of Hezbollah funding, mostly by Iran, not only. And then what you just mentioned, and the headline which Secretary of State Pompeo has given it is maximum pressure. Maximum pressure intended, as he said, to bring Iran to the negotiating table, negotiating about its nuclear aspirations, about its so-called malign activities in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, where have you. And while this is what Pompeo said, it seems as if he and President Trump want to get Iran to surrender to the Trump administration, or else to escalate what has now, or up to now, been only a war of words to some conflagration in the Hormuz Straits.
Mr. Javedanfar, how do you perceive it?
To be honest with you, I think, it seems that this has got to do with American domestic politics, I think, first and foremost. I think President Trump has got 2 years to go till he stands for re-election, and I think he wants to show the American voter, especially the evangelicals. Because as we know, 25% of the entire American population, according to Pew Research, is evangelical. He wants to show them that he confronted Iran, and we know they are very pro-Israel. And I think there's a vested interest, there's common interest between Israel, Saudi Arabia, United States. And I think there's also common interest by Russia, to go after Iran right now, to cut off Iranian supplies to the world market, because this increases demand for Saudi and Russian oil. The Russians are stepping in, and also Iraq. Iraq is going to make a pretty penny from these sanctions. But the question is, what will the government of President Rouhani do? I can delve into the economic stuff later, but this is unprecedented pressure that the Islamic Republic is going to be under from now until the next U.S. elections.
Ambassador Ayalon?
Well, the Nuke is really tightening over the necks of the Ayatollahs, and this is Trump's policy. He has promised it in his campaign. He doesn't expect people or countries not to heed to American pressures. So if one kind of pressure doesn't help, they apply more pressure, and I think we have not seen the end of it. I would also like to say, pursuant to what Meir said, yes, politically he is also benefiting out of it, but also internationally, because after this fiasco with North Korea, it is important for Trump to reassert his leadership and his strength, his perceived strength among the nation in the international arena. And Iran at this point is an easy target. He's an easy target, and he will continue to do that. And it is really unprecedented. I don't see how the Iranians can get out of it, because they don't have anywhere to get any kind of comfort. Not from Russia, not even from China. The timing was also very carefully ascertained. They gave the 6 months for these 8 countries to adapt to the new situation. And also during these 6 months, they have made sure that the supply will not be cut short in the international markets. So oil prices may go up a little bit, but not to a crisis position.
Mr. Oren, the various countries that received the waivers include Italy, Greece, Taiwan, China, India, Japan, South Korea, and Turkey, three of which have already brought their imports to zero, including Italy, Greece, and Taiwan. Nevertheless, China, India, Japan, South Korea, and Turkey kept importing oil from the Islamic Republic in various volumes, with India already indicating, contrary to previous statements, that it is starting to identify alternative markets. We see also South Korea and Japan indicating the same thing. Turkey, which vowed to continue doing business with the Islamic Republic regardless of what the United States demands, is already indicating various signs of caving from that position. And China, even though it did declare in its statement by the spokesperson of the foreign ministry in Beijing, it claimed we will remain open to cooperation and so on with Iran, but the companies in practice do not follow through on this Iranian pledge because, of course, the U.S. market is more substantive, and with alternative markets and additional volume introduced into the market, the Iranian output is deemed redundant. To what degree do you see now Iran actually being able to emerge out of this crisis, also considering the fact that all those floods in Iran are plaguing that country to the degree that the people are already in a desperate state, regardless of international pressure? Where is this standing?
Well, obviously, when you have a budget and you have a shortfall, which you didn't predict, you either put off your expenditures until next year, or in this case, 2 years from now, hoping that a Democrat will be in the White House, or you brace yourself to some mass demonstrations, which the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij and other organs of the state would have to suppress violently. We could very well see some sort of uprising, which is what the Trump administration obviously hopes will happen. Now, when Pompeo unveiled these new sanctions, he tried to deflect questions regarding the American support of the MEK, the Mujahideen Khalq, which the Iranians consider terror organizations, and the Americans, at least for a time, supported. What Pompeo said was, we are attentive to the will of the people in Iran, not any particular group, and the Iranian people want the regime to stop funding Hezbollah and stop doing what it is doing, and of course direct whatever money it has towards domestic uses. Now, there is also another sanction which we didn't mention up to now, and this has to do with Chabahar port. And Chabahar port is used by India. It is leased by India. It is part of the Indian trade plan. The Americans also are using this port in order to send stuff to Afghanistan for reconstruction. So there is a contradiction here. The Americans want to help Modi, especially now that he is in an election campaign. They want to help Afghanistan, but they don't want it done through Iran. And up to now, they didn't manage to solve this contradiction.
Mr. Javedanfar?
Well, I'd like to add a third option, which the Islamic Republic is following. The two that Amir mentioned. The third one is to borrow heavily from the Iranian central bank. And what is the Iranian central bank? Where does it get its money from? Printing machines. They are printing money, and this is unfortunately a disease that has been plaguing Iranian economy since the end of the Iran-Iraq war. During the presidency of Rafsanjani, the inflation reached 50% because it was printing so much money. All Iranian presidents since the end of the war have tried to attract foreign investment. For some reason or other, they have failed to do so, and to make up for the lack of foreign investment, they've printed money, which has created problems of inflation. Look, right now the Islamic Republic is worried about the IRGC sanctions. They are going to pass a law now saying anybody in Iran who follows the U.S. sanctions will be prosecuted. Because in Iran, people are worried if they do a business with some IRGC-affiliated organization, they could be placed on a sanctions list by the United States. And this is something that's really worrying the Islamic Republic.
Just to put things in perspective for the sake of our viewers, to what degree is the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, invested in the Iranian economy? To what degree does it actually control the various companies and corporations within the Iranian economy?
Look, if you're asking me to give you what percentage of the Iranian economy belongs to the IRGC, these things vary. I think a safe percentage is between 30 to 40%. There are the Iranian pension funds that have got far more, or had far more liquidity at their disposal. The problem is the IRGC plays the role of a monopoly, and even President Rouhani said it 2 years ago. He says if you have an organization that has the guns, that has the news sites, that has the economic organizations, even the holiest person would become corrupted. And this is the problems that the IRGC is creating for Iran, is because of the corruption and because it's become too big. I have to say, look, it's really worrying. The price of goods, the price of food in Iran has gone up 90% since last year this time. People are not only eating less meat, fish, people are eating less tomatoes, people are eating less potatoes, people are eating less onions. People, the economy, I'll go for more economic information later on, but, this is a really, really difficult time. In the next 2 years, that they can print enough money to survive, but they will have to wait and see if Trump is reelected.
Master Ayalon, how do you view this?
Well, I think they are really on a path that I don't see how they get out of it, because, as we mentioned, it's not just the United States that's putting now the heavy weight, and they pull no stops at pressuring them. Also, their neighbors are also looking at the demise of these Ayatollah regimes, and the Saudis, the Gulf countries, the other larger Sunni countries, whether it's Egypt or Jordan, they are all standing as one front. So I don't think they have anywhere to go. The Russians cannot help them much. They can help them with munitions, but not with money, and they do not need the munitions. They cannot feed the people with munitions and weapons.
Russia is stabbing Iran in the back. How is Russia going to? The Iranians know. Sorry to jump in here. The Iranians said, the Iranian Minister of Oil, Zanganeh, said he's very angry with the Saudis and the Russians for wanting to step in and to provide the oil. Sorry,
right.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Right. Well, they have other problems with Russia also in the policy in Syria, where the Russians very, I would say, either by default or design, are actually turning a blind eye to Israel's operations there.
Well, there were also reports on the ground about active battles between the Russians and Iranian-backed forces within Syria.
Right. So they are really in a, I don't see any way out. So if they had thought that maybe they will find some kind of way out with money from China and sending oil to China, I think this is also closing up. So it's like either they are suicidal, and we know that many of those Shiites were suicidal, and they are going to take Iran all the way down with them to this really, I would say, very, very large explosion, apocalyptic explosion, or they will have to cave in and they will try a tactic where they will show some agreement, right, or with the American policies, waiting for 2 years, hoping that the Democrats will come back and the things will get better for them.
Mr. Oren, to what degree, as we heard U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo list various demands that were already made clear several months back, but to what degree do the Iranians look at the situation and say, you know what, I understand the demands of the United States, I don't want to cave, but the current pressure is too much to handle, and I have to bring about certain concessions, as we just heard Ambassador Ayalon allude to?
If we were sitting here trying to analyze what is called a rational actor in political science or international relations, maybe the answer would suggest itself, yes, we would find some diplomatic way to finesse it and cave in without saying so much. But we are dealing with a revolutionary, messianic regime, and it is very dangerous to push its back to the wall because it can lash out even if it doesn't seem rational, even if it is going to go down in flames. Now, what have the Iranians been doing lately? They have helped Venezuela because they know that this is a sore point for Trump. They want to make mischief in Trump's backyard. And in Venezuela, the Russians and the Iranians are on the same side, Maduro's side, and mostly in Iraq. When Pompeo unveiled his new sanctions, he called the Iraqi leadership first because he knows that the Iranians can try and upset the very fragile equilibrium in Baghdad, and they can try and undo whatever the Americans managed to do there for the last 15 years. So it is quite risky for the Americans to do what they're doing without counting on how the Iranians might behave, which is not the way an American or a European or even an Israeli would behave in a similar situation.
Mr. Javedanfar?
I think an important question to ask, and one I'm always trying to find out, is who do the Iranian people blame? Do they blame Trump or do they blame the regime? I have to say, well, when I look at the press and in Iran, there's more than 40, 45 newspapers, so I can't read all of them. But many of the newspapers that I read, and we have to remember, Iran is the third largest country in terms of journalists behind bars. Despite that, I have to really give credit to Iranian journalists. They are showing such incredible maturity. I see so many articles who say, yes, Trump is bad, but what about all those years where we had the chance to carry out very deep surgery for our economy, to carry out plans, to cut corruption, to cut mismanagement? What did we do? We did nothing. And I have to say, Said, as much as people are angry at Trump, and come on, we would all be if we were living in Iran, people are also very angry. They can't blame the regime because you'd get arrested. But Iran's newspaper and journalists are also not blind to the fact that the regime that the people who could change things economically sat on their hands and just let the train roll as before, and it's hit the wall. All these years, Iran could not come up with another product from other than oil. Seriously. I mean, look at Turkey. Turkey's got no oil. Iran, look at the industrial conglomerate that they've built. Iran, at the beginning of the revolution, had a huge capacity for industry. The Shah, despite all his faults, but now the regime just let it go to rot.
Ambassador Ayalon?
Well, I would say if we take into consideration that this is not irrational, that this is really a messianic regime, then there is more than 50% chance that they will go in a violent way, in some kind of a cataclysmic end, which may put in risk all of us here in the Middle East and beyond. One of a very obvious step, violent step that they can take, very aggressive, is to block the Strait of Hormuz. And this is a casus belli, and this will start a war. They will, if they see that they have no way out, they may decide, okay, if we go down, we'll go down in a style, a Shiite style, with flames and with chaotic situation. And here, I think we will have to see a much more calibrated international response, and that could be two ways. Either the Europeans, at some point, they're getting tired themselves and they have all these internal problems themselves. If they join the Americans, I think that could be the last straw for the Iranians to either, surrender or just go under.
Well, I think to a certain degree on the maritime aspect, you see already the British and French also in the area of the Strait of Hormuz waiting to see the developments. I would like actually to ask Mr. Oren, with regard to the IRGC, just appointed a new chief commander, as well as various statements pertaining specifically to the Strait of Hormuz from the Rear Admiral of the IRGC's Navy, who said that if indeed the Iranian exports of oil will be blocked through the strait, the Islamic Republic will make sure that nobody else will use that strait, and this will implode to an all-out conflagration, while the United States was less inclined to respond to those threats. It has stated, or the U.S. Navy has stated on several cases, that it received the mandate from the U.S. administration to use all tools at its disposal in order to make sure that the strait will remain open. Not to forget that the strait is the waterway where a third of all seaborne crude oil passes on a daily basis, as well as about a 1/4 of all traded oil. To what degree do you think that this would be the trigger to everything imploding?
What the Iranians have said is that if we can't export our oil, nobody will.
No. They said that if somebody closes the the Strait of Hormuz, then we won't allow any...
No, what they said, this is the implication, but what they said, if the sanctions don't allow us to export our oil, we will respond in kind, closing the strait.
I've never heard of that, but sorry. Okay.
This was in one of the questions addressed to Mike Pompeo.
It was actually in a report in Arabic and Al-Alam, the domestic Arabic
I've not seen
report.
anything Persian that says Iran says it's not.
Yes, but in any event, it could be just an empty threat. And as you indicated, there are two military organizations in Iran. You have the regular military, Army, Navy, Air Force, and the IRGC, which is, of course, more extreme, more fanatic, and can be counted on by the regime more than the regular military. Now, the United States has some experience in from the 1980s in what they called Operation Praying Mantis, fighting against the Iranians when the Iranians tried to hit Kuwaiti and other tankers. This was the reflagging operation and escorting the tankers. And the Americans, of course, have a lot of power. On the other hand, small fishing boats and other sort of small nuisance boats could hit a destroyer and above. We have seen the USS Cole at Aden 19 years ago. So the Americans are surely going to win. The question is at what cost. Now, it doesn't really matter who the commanding general of the IRGC is, as long as Qassam Soleimani is still in charge of the Quds Force of the IRGC. But the problem when we talk about what could happen to the regime is that you can't see any leader emerging for the opposition. And we have seen in various places, Lech Walesa in Poland, later Boris Yeltsin in Russia, versus those who tried to stop Gorbachev from extending the perestroika. Even in Syria, you don't have any leader of the opposition to attract people around him. And in Iran, we haven't seen anyone emerge as an alternative. Perhaps had he emerged, he would have been assassinated. It is not certain that such a leader could have toppled the regime. But the various students and unions and others up to now did not coalesce around one figure.
Mr. Javedanfar, I'd like to ask specifically about the military of the Islamic Republic and the IRGC, which are two different entities. To what degree are they aligned right now when Iran is under so much pressure? And to what degree is actually the government, which was portrayed always as a moderate government? We saw Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif just several weeks ago resign, and the person who actually stepped forward and tried to provide Zarif with all the backing was Qasem Soleimani of the Quds Force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, who declared that Zarif has the full backing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, which shows to a certain degree that the one accommodates the other, rather than being, as the West kept to portray those two elements of the regime, which is the hardliners, and the government, which is so-called moderate.
Okay, can I just refer to 2 points before I answer your question?
Actually, we don't have time for that.
Look, the Iranian, the IRGC, and the army, they've done a lot of cross transfer between the commanders today. I don't think there's a chance that the army is going to rise up against the IRGC. And in the government, because the IRGC was placed on the terrorist list, Rouhani, at least in terms of verbal statements, has put himself on the side of the IRGC, but deep divisions remain. There are very deep divisions that are becoming even deeper after the recent floods in Iran, which are unfortunately historic in what has happened. But in all this, I would have to say, please don't, the Iranian regime, on the one hand, as radical as it is not messianic that is going to go down in flames, because Operation Mantis shows this. They could have carried on fighting, but they backed off. But also, we in Israel have testimony to that. According to General Eisenkot, we dropped 2,000 bombs on the heads of Iranian forces in Syria. Where is the messianic people who want to go down in flames? I think this is actually one of the reasons that the Iranian regime is very worried, because of Mantis, because of what happened in the Persian Gulf in 1987, and because of what's happening with Israel. They're worried that if they go out fighting, they could come out of that as well at the losing end.
Ambassador Ayalon, I'd like to ask you with regard to the pressure campaign of the United States, shortly, as we don't have a lot of time left. Do you believe that the Trump administration will continue to ratchet up the pressure? And to what degree do you believe that this will be an indication of shifting from a diplomatic and economic warfare to an actual confrontation?
Well, the short answer is absolutely. They will continue to ratchet up the pressure until we see either a change of policy or we'll see some kind of a breaking up or breaking down in Iran. I would say there is one element which has to be really emphasized, is that now, where they will have to cut costs radically, I think Israel will benefit out of it, because Hezbollah will be short of funds, Hamas will be short of funds, and also the PIJ, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which works also to our favor, to the Egyptians, and to all countries in the region.
And the Assad region is very much short of funds. They are seriously running out of fuel because Iran is not supplying to the Syrians anymore.
Indeed. Closing sentence?
A mediator could step in. We have seen President Macron of France do it a few months ago. He didn't succeed. The outgoing French ambassador to Washington, Gérard Araud, who used to be the ambassador to Israel, said that it was close, but Trump didn't want it. We are in a race against the clock. Either the Ayatollah or the commander-in-chief will have to give in.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today, so I'd like to thank Mr. Meir Javedanfar, Mr. Amir Oren, and Ambassador Dani Ayalon. And I'd like to thank our viewers, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.